how do you prepare for 2023? How do you wrap up this year? Let's bring in Kathryn Rooney Vera to talk about that. She is the head of global macro research at Bulltick, so she's one of those top-down people. Kathryn, thanks so much for joining us. Coming into the studio in cold, dark and wet New York. Are you from Miami?
I'm from New Jersey, but I live in...
You live in Miami, which is
I'd probably rather be in Miami.
I'd rather be there as well.
It's cold there too, but nothing compared.
So what do you think about, this conundrum? We're at a point where it doesn't seem like a recession really is even priced in yet, and that's pretty crazy given that everyone expects a recession.
Yeah, I think we're already beyond talking about recession, and everyone's talking about recovery before recession has actually happened. And something Kaylee mentioned, it's all about inflation. Yes, it's about inflation, but for me, it's all about the labor market, because the labor market remains so strong, and 5-6% increases in salaries are not commensurate with a 2% inflation target. So my view, and you and I have talked about this previously, Kaylee, is that the Fed knows, in my view, that it has to get unemployment higher, and that it's horrible to say, but
by the way, we're going to talk with Claudia Sahm a little bit later. She of the Sahm rule.
The Sahm rule is,
and she thinks that's a mistake to argue that the Phillips curve is still alive and well, and you've got to push up unemployment in order to pull down inflation.
Well, I'd like to hear her view on where the NARU is right now. I think it's around 4.9%. We're at 3.7. So for the natural level of unemployment, if it is in fact 4.9%, anything below that is in fact inflationary. So what's her view on wage price spiral? If we look at...
Hang on, I'm writing these questions down. Taking notes.
If you look at history, an unemployment move of that amount has never not coincided with an economy already in recession. So I think that's important to note. The yield curve is pricing in recession. We know that, but there could be a normalization next year. And my thing is, everyone's talking about how 2023 the Fed isn't going to cut. But if you look also at history, the past 14 monetary cycles, the last hike versus the first cut, that timing is much shorter than you think. It's on average 4 months.
Okay, so maybe historically that is true, but if you listen to the Federal Reserve and Chairman Powell now, they are saying we are not going to do that. We are talking higher for longer. We are not giving up until inflation is back to our target, which right now is 2%. So even if inflation is cooling, we are still far, far away from that. What gives you the conviction that the Fed is actually not going to tolerate the weakness in the labor market and in the broader economy as they say they will, and have to make that pivot?
Well, I think it's going to have to come down to how far the labor market rolls over. So I think unemployment goes to 4.9%. That's the NARU. It's hard to estimate, but
where are we now? 3.7%.
We're 3.7 in unemployment. So I do think the Fed needs to force the labor market to roll over, because there's supply side forces and there's demand side. We all talk about both of them. The supply side forces are improving. Used car lots are packed now.
Yes, I've seen prices come down considerably.
She knows
in the used market.
And what you'll respond to.
Massively. I know you love cars. So I do think supply side forces are improving. You have China reopening, which you guys have been talking all morning about, especially you've been up so early. But demand side really hasn't taken that hit yet. And
by the way, we also got a $1.7 trillion omnibus. Which that's another...
was in my notes to talk about as well. So we do have inflationary impulses, but that's going to aggravate the demand side, which hasn't yet rolled over. Consumption is still pretty good. It's been very resilient. If you look at Conference Board, that's been very resilient, and that has a very strong correlation with the unemployment rate. So if unemployment moves higher, Conference Board consumer confidence drops, you get a rollover in consumption. People are still spending, even though inflation is very high. It's because they have jobs.
Well, and when people are still spending, and maybe they're doing it by leveraging up more so now, all that pandemic stimulus money and savings built up has evaporated essentially. But what does that mean for corporate earnings? Because in theory, if people are still out there spending, tolerating higher prices, you're going to be able to continue passing on your higher input costs. And in theory, that would mean margins hold up and profits hold up.
Right. So you have nominal growth and inflation. So I do think that next inflation is going to come down. I do believe in a recession. I've been out of consensus on that since virtually the beginning of this year, calling for recession as the next phase of the economic cycle. Stagflation to recession was my outlook piece for 2022. And I do think that we could get earnings having to be revised lower, and nominal growth, in my view, yeah, it's positive, but real growth next year I have at minus 0.4%. So that's year over year. So I have 3 quarters baked in of negative sequential annualized growth in the U.S.
I just want to make one point to the consumer, because savings rates have fallen substantially. I mean, we, during the pandemic shot up to, record highs for American savings rates. And now we're, over 12%. And now we're back down to about 2% on savings rates. But I was talking with Mike McKee about this, and he pulled up bank balances. I've got the index in there. If the controller wants to bring that, bank balances are still holding pretty high right now. They've started to roll over a little bit, but they're still pretty fat. So the U.S. consumer shouldn't be counted out quite yet. There you see
and you can find this on your Bloomberg terminal for those listening on radio.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, if you're listening on radio, let's just say they build up big time during the pandemic, and we show this, and they have held their pretty well. However, Kaylee points out, credit card debt is starting to climb again. The consumer's starting to leverage up. How do you take this all into account and put it into your investment strategy? What are you doing right now? Are you still defensive? And when do we find an inflection point when you really can turn around and start investing again?
That's a good thought. I'm still defensive going into next year. I still like energy, utilities, staples. I think you still have to remain defensive. But once you do get that change in the labor market, I think that's where the market drops a bit further. I think we could go lower in the S&P, and then I think we start talking about the Fed's guidance turning a little more dovish. So I am in the camp where the labor market determines how quickly the Fed could stop talking about higher for longer. And yes, the Fed's all in now, but the policy mistake has already been made.
Right. All right, Kathryn Rooney Vera of Baltic, thank you so much for joining us in studio. How are you getting back to Miami? What airline are you flying?
Oh gosh, thank God not Southwest, but I'm not far better, Spirit. So,
oh man,
for tall people like you and I, that's very complicated.
Yeah, it's difficult, and I don't envy you that. Actually, I have to say we're going to talk to Helene Becker a little bit later in the program.
We're deep teasing a lot
about the airline situation. Your comment on Southwest reminded me of that because she says they have a really strong balance sheet. So as an investment, maybe not the worst airline out there, but I have heard them referred to as Southworst because of the cancellations and delays that we've seen this holiday season.
Well, thank you again for joining us, Kathryn. Best of luck
Thank you very much.
in your travels.